there is a very thin line between jingoism and genuine sense of pride. To kind of say everything about our past was glorious, everything was great. There were lots of mistakes too. Constant suspicion of the other, those were certainly there. And I think history offers both these dual purposes. One is to learn from our mistakes and to take corrective measures so that these mistakes are never repeated and committed again. The second one, which is not the intention of a historian to actually drum up some kind of pride and so on, but then a sense of genuine pride, a sense of genuine, looking back at the achievements and the contributions of your ancestors, the bravery, their, chivalry. That also is very, very important because, as I said right at the beginning, history is that mirror which gives you this sense of identity. A very good evening, everyone. And first of all, many, many thanks to Neera Mishra ji, to the Draupadi Trust and the Mahotsav. It's quite a stupendous task to continue something with passion for 20 long years. And the very fact that it has weathered the storm for 20 years and grown from strength to strength, on behalf of everyone, all my fellow panelists and everyone present here, I wish you several more decades of resurgence of the ancient culture, the civilizational glory of Bharat that you are attempting through your trust. So, thank you. As the last speaker in a otherwise marathon session of several eminent panelists, in a session called Hamare Granth, Hamara Itihas, as a historian, I couldn't, any less stress the importance of this discipline of history, which unfortunately, I think in our growing up years, it has been taught to us in such a insipid and a boring fashion. Some of the young people here, I'm sure, because I was one among them, where all history classes meant kneeling outside the class because the maximum amount of punishment that I think I got in any subject was always history, because the kind of redundant information we are always fed, who, to mug up by rote, who succeeded whom, which war was fought in which year, extraneous details which we are not made to understand what the importance of that is. It's only as you grow up you realize that history is that mirror in which you can identify yourself as a nation, as a people, as a civilization. I am so glad to know. Oh my God, okay. To all, with due apologies to all the history teachers who might be present here. I wish I was your student, ma'am. So I think our colonial masters understood this very, very well. That to capture a group of people, a country as vast as ours, to make them your slaves, not just politically or economically, but also intellectually, you needed to break the spine of that civilization. You needed to break that sense of self-respect and identity that they had. And they knew that the only way to do that was through a control over our narrative of the past. And that's what we are seeing all through. I mean, today history is such a live battlefield. Political parties are fighting over matters of history because they also realize that the key to, as George Orwell had said, the key to the future is through the past. You had someone like Sir John Strachey, who was the person in charge of the Imperial Civil Services. He had said, and to all the new batches of ICS officers, Imperial Civil Service officers, the first thing he would say is that the most important thing to know about India is that there never is or there never was an India. So this whole idea that there was no concept of a nation state itself, there was never a concept of India. We, the British, came and gave you this civilizing power. We gave you a sense of nationhood. We gave you education, railways, culture, civilization, and all of that. That has been somewhere dinned into our heads. I think a lot of us educated Indians too, subliminally somewhere we believe that we were always warring states, we didn't have a concept of a nation or a civilization, and that we kept covering in front of invasions. The very famous Nigerian author Chinua Achebe had this to say, that until the lions find their own storytellers, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. In the case of India, unfortunately, as a nation of lions who have been hunted for centuries, we've outsourced the story of our own country, the historiography of our country, to our hunters. And it's only now slowly that the lions are finding a little squeaky voice to come up and say that no, there is another alternative history in comparison to what has always been taught to us. So, drawing from, a kind of a summary of what all the other eminent speakers have narrated before me, and also drawing from my own latest book called Brave Hearts of Bharat, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that, about this whole spirit of Kshatra that I think Dr. Ratnu also mentioned right at the start, and how that is something that has been totally kind of eliminated from our psyche and consciousness for these very reasons. Now, if again, going back to the history textbooks, all the wars that we can remember today, as students, if you also recollect, it will be a long laundry list of wars that we lost. Right from the myth that was created of the Aryan invasion, which has now been debunked due to thanks to lots of genetic discoveries, archaeological discoveries, and scientific linguistic studies and so on. What was the idea that was conveyed to us by our colonial masters? That right from your earliest ancestors, you are so proud of this civilization, this itself was brought to you from outside. The Aryans came from outside, so we are just a software update, the East India Company. So it's in your destiny to be ruled by people from outside, and you are a nation of losers. And so we have also, I think, inherited that spirit somewhere in the way we think of our past. So all the wars, from the invasions of the Greeks, the Huns, the Shakas, then of course the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, all the European powers that Vaibhav mentioned, it seems like a long laundry list of battles we lost. Battle of the Arab invasion of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim. We all know that when it happened, we have studied about that. But I don't know how many of us would know the resistance that was put by the rulers of Sindh, the Brahmin family of Sindh, Chacha, and later his successor Raja Dahar, who ensured that almost for 60, 70 years, Sindh was unoccupied by the Arabs. But we would know about Muhammad bin Qasim. That is a given in all our textbooks. The battles of Panipat, India and Indians lost. The Battle of Tarain, we lost. The Anglo-Mysore Wars, we lost. The Anglo-Maratha Wars, we lost. The Anglo-Sikh Wars, we lost. The Battle of Plassey, we lost. Battle of Buxar, we lost. So, I mean, if we are still around today as the only pre-Bronze era civilization which is alive and kicking, there must have been some wars that we won also. There must have been some amount of courage that our poor ancestors also, yeah, it is. And so where are those, details of those wars? Who are those heroes? And more importantly, also, who are those heroines? A lot of women also in this long story. And since we are commemorating such a illustrious woman from this part of the country, Draupadi, who are these Draupadis who came time and again in the course of our long history? That is something that has simply evaporated from the historiography of this nation. Now, I'll just give a few examples of this, and then maybe once we have the discussion, it would make more sense. A few names and a few examples of a few battles which probably our history books did not allude to, unfortunately, and the reasons are obvious, as I already mentioned. Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Karkota dynasty of Kashmir. Now, how many of you in this, especially the young people, had you heard of Lalitaditya? Lalitaditya, a few. After. So, Lalitaditya was known as the second Alexander, the Samudragupta, second Samudragupta of India, who ensured that the Arabs never occupied any part of Bharat other than that narrow strip of Sindh. Now, though they were fighting among each other, a large confederacy that was formed of many rulers of that time, of the northern, western, and the some part of southern India too, to form a confederacy against the invading Arabs. Lalitaditya in Kashmir, you had Yashovarman in Kannauj, You had the Gurjara ruler, Jaya Bhatt the fourth. You had Bappa Rawal of Mewar. You had the Lata king, Pulakeshi Raja, Rashtrakuta king Vikramaditya, and his feudatory, Danti Durga. All of them forming through different alliances to ensure that Junaid and all these other Arab governors who kept coming after Muhammad bin Qasim did not occupy anything beyond those few port cities in Sindh. It is very important to also realize that within a few decades of the death of the Prophet and the Caliph's armies going all over the world, a large part of Central Asia, Africa were Islamized, and right from the Atlantic Ocean to the gates of India, you had a very very vast Islamic empire that was built by the Caliph's forces. But imagine that it took the same group of people 500 years, not one or two, but 500 years to establish the first Islamic Sultanate, which was a slave dynasty in Delhi in 1206. So for 500 years, there was pushback, there was resistance that was given to them. So who were the people who were doing this, and why are we not told about those brave hearts who managed to, give that resistance? Whether Lalitaditya and others, as I mentioned, they started it, but even a woman in Gujarat, again someone who probably is so little known, of the Chalukyan Solanki dynasty there, called Rani Naiki Devi. Naiki Devi was a Goan princess of the Kadamba dynasty there, and she is married into the Chalukya family to Ajaypala, and once Ajaypala is killed, she becomes the regent queen of an infant called Mool Raj, who is probably 7-8 years old. And at that time, you had Muhammad Ghori actually invading India. And Ghori thinks, that this is a very easy, easy province to target, low-hanging fruit. A lady is ruling this place, so let's attack Gujarat. But in what is known as the Battle of Kasarhada in 1178, Naiki Devi's forces ensure a complete rout of Muhammad Ghori, so much so that Ghori never manages to look back at Gujarat again. It's out of his scheme of things. There's all the contemporary, Islamic chroniclers to talk about how embarrassing it was to be defeated by a woman. But it's interestingly, even our Indian chroniclers, the Hindu chroniclers, the Jain chroniclers, they don't do much justice to Naiki Devi. She's hardly mentioned. Very disparagingly, she said that the opponent was so weak that even a woman could defeat him. Not giving importance to her bravery, her courage, that if the opponent was strong, then she would not have been able to defeat him. So that's, of course, the usual bias that exists against women, and particularly women rulers. But all through, it's not only the ruling class. Even when Muhammad Ghazni, invades Gujarat, the Solanki ruler there, Bhim Dev, he has, of course, run away from Patan, and Ghazni goes to Somnath to destroy the mandir there, and he is astonished to see 50,000 common Hindus armed in whatever little things that they have to protect their mandir, their Jyotirling, and their Bhagwan. And it takes him 3 days to kill all these people, largely amateur soldiers, and then capture Ghazni and the Somnath Mandir. And even after he breaks it, and when he's on his way back, the sense of revenge, that existed in the minds of common people, that you have desecrated a very very sacred spot of our ancestors. There are some people who appear as imposters as a guide, and Muhammad Ghazni is looking for water in the deserts. So they purposely take him hither and thither, make him lose his path in the desert, and then he gets suspicious that this man is taking us somewhere else, and then he's interrogated, and then that fellow confesses, saying, yes, you destroyed our God, and so to take revenge, we were taking you in the interior of the desert, and to kill you later, that's what we tried. So this sense, when you say that there was no concept of a civilization, there was no concept of a nation itself, who are these people who did not belong to royal families and all of that, but common people too, had that sense in them to defend what was sacred to them. And their faith, their country, their kingdom, all of that was extremely sacred to all of them. Now, the same, I mean, one can multiply these stories, the Ranas, Maharanas of Mewar, of which Dr. Ratnu has written such a wonderful book. Rana Kumbha, who was an invincible ruler who built probably the Kumbhalgarh fort is the second longest fort wall in the world after the Great Wall of China. But I'm not sure how many Indians would know that or even go and pay our tributes there to what one of our ancestors has built. Now, coming even down south to some of these other kingdoms, Vaibhav mentioned about the Marathas, but the Cholas too, under Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola. While the Marathas did not go into the high seas and capture other countries, all of us know that in 1025 CE, you had Rajendra Chola leading one of the largest naval expeditions going all the way up to Southeast Asia to Srivijaya, the Srivijaya Islands in Indonesia, Malaysia, that region. And his father Rajaraja had by then already conquered Sri Lanka, Maldives and all these places. And today, after so many centuries, if we find some remnants of Indian culture there, Hindu civilizational imprints there, Tamil being the language in many of those places, some of the greatest Hindu temples in Cambodia and all these other countries in that vicinity, it all somewhere traces back to these times where, along with military conquest and trade outreach, a civilizational outreach to that part of India was also important. We did not colonize them. It would have been very easy for us to colonize those islands and bring back the riches and make it a part of India, but we did not do that. We let local rulers actually rule there. And with time, I think the locals took precedence, but the cultural imprint was something that was still very much left behind. But imagine in 1025, at a time when there were no mariners' compasses, there were no naval navigation equipment, to actually have that level of knowledge and understanding of astronomy and also knowledge of sea currents and so on, which in my chapter on the Cholas I've mentioned that how they were experts in knowing at what when a particular nakshatra appears in the stars, that is when the sea breeze would be at a particular speed. So if you leave the port of Nagapattinam on eastern India, you will go in a certain direction and speed to actually go and attack straight onto Srivijaya and not go hither and thither. So that level of precision which they managed to do 1,000 years ago, I think it's a great sense of achievement that we must feel about that. Now also other coastal kingdoms which Vaibhav mentioned. So in Karnataka too, the state that I come from, a tiny little principality called Ullal, where you had this lady called Rani Abbakka. Actually, there were not one but four Rani Abbakkas there, all of whom managed to destroy the Portuguese every time they tried to enter Ullal or occupy Mangalore, the coastal town of Mangalore. In fact, and using such rudimentary technology, because that place was so full of coconuts. So the coconuts would be emptied and inside that you would have the ammunition put in. And in the middle of the night, these coconuts, burning coconuts would be hurled at the Portuguese fleet. And one such occasion when Rani Abbakka did this, an entire Portuguese fleet of almost 500 ships is supposed to have caught fire and got destroyed. Even all their generals and everyone destroyed in this. And the account of that is actually, it traveled across the world to the Emperor of Persia, who talks about it. And there's an Italian traveler, Pietro della Well, who comes all the way to India, having heard that in the Persian emperor's court, and he also meets Rani Abbakka and details about her in his memoirs. But then within India, I'm sure many people would not know who Rani Abbakka was from Karnataka. And in the neighboring state of Kerala, you had this man called Marthanda Varma, who he was speaking about the Dutch. The Dutch were actually one of the earliest forces who were trading on the global stock exchanges. The Dutch power by the 15th century, 16th century was at the heights. right from South Africa, going all the way to Asia, to India, and also to Japan, Maldives, the entire range. And they had great plans of colonizing India, taking control over the pepper trade that flourished in Kerala. And it is said that the Dutch governor comes to the Travancore rulers' court and says, "I'm planning to attack your kingdom." And Martandavarma jokingly, replies to him that, "Oh, I see. Even I'm actually planning to attack Europe, but my fishermen are a little busy right now making those machwas. And so once they do that, even I'm planning to go and attack Europe." So he, gave that reply to the Dutch governor, who was very incensed. But he didn't use this just as a bravado. What followed was what is known as the Battle of Kolachal in 1741, where the Dutch were defeated so comprehensively that I think their entire ambitions, their trade, particularly from Kerala, collapsed completely. Otherwise, maybe we would be having these talks today in Dutch, because they would have colonized us much more effectively than the British or the French. So a tiny little kingdom in Kerala, and Martandavarma, who managed to do this. But beyond, I don't know, even in Kerala today, thanks to decades of Marxist rule, how many would even know Martandavarma there? Ideally, in any other country, I think his statues would be there at every road square, or every student would know about the Battle of Kolachal, which was one of the after the 1905, you had the Russo-Japanese War, where a Asian power defeated the Europeans. Here was a occasion where a very tiny Indian power actually dealt a crushing blow on the Dutch, but we are not told much about this. Likewise, vast parts of this country too don't feature in this larger narrative of what the history of India is, especially the northeast of India. We don't even care to know what parts of it's a tyranny of distance. And we see that even today. A state there can burn for days and it doesn't catch that kind of attention in mainstream narrative or in media circles. Likewise, you had the Ahoms of Assam, who ruled for 600 long years. And the very name Ahom or Assam itself was Asama, something that was invincible. And in Assamia language, ha and sa are used interchangeably. So Assam became Aham and Ahom. So they were the invincibles who could never be conquered by any forces, whether it was the Afghans, whether it was the Mughals later. Right from Bakhtiyar Khilji, who goes all the way to Nalanda, captures Bengal, but when he goes to Kamrup or Assam, you had this ruler there called Prithu before the rule of the Ahoms, who ensures that Bakhtiyar Khilji and his people are literally running away back to Bengal to save their lives. And that same spirit continued even later on. And you had what is known as the Battle of Saraighat in 1671, where Lachit Barphukan, one of the generals of the Assam, Ahom Raja, Chakradhwaj Singha and Jayadhwaj Singha, he ensures there is a complete rout of one of the largest imperial forces that Aurangzeb sends under Raja Jai Singh of Jaipur, Raja Ram Singh of Jaipur, to go and capture Assam. And using local strengths that they had a lot of bamboo, they had a lot of forests, they had elephants, and they had the power of the mighty Brahmaputra, and so naval power that they knew about. So they built their own small little boats and so on, and drew the Mughal army into an unknown, inhospitable terrain and beat them through what was their strength area, which was the naval power. And after that, again, Aurangzeb never dared to send anybody again to Assam to capture it. So it really remained invincible, or Assama. And to those who say, the history of India is not even documented, it is we don't know details. In the case of the Ahoms, for example, you had what are known as the Burunjis, where all the 600 years of the Assam history under the Ahoms is meticulously documented in manuscripts. Be it their political life, their social, their cultural life, the growth of their language, everything is documented. It's just that nobody was bothering to read it or listen to it, either out of malice or just because, as I said, tyranny of distance. So I must state one thing important here before I conclude, which is there is a very thin line between jingoism and genuine sense of pride. To kind of say everything about our past was glorious, everything was great, we won everything, we were chivalrous. There were lots of mistakes too, as Vaibhav alluded to, internecine wars, our constant suspicion of the other, those were certainly there. And I think history offers both these dual purposes. One is to learn from our mistakes and to take corrective measures so that these mistakes are never repeated and committed again. The second one, which is not the intention of a historian to actually drum up some kind of pride and so on, but then a sense of genuine pride, a sense of genuine, looking back at the achievements and the contributions of your ancestors, the bravery, their, chivalry, that also is very, very important because, as I said right at the beginning, history is that mirror which gives you this sense of identity. So if you're looking at yourself as a spineless civilization that has been one of losers, you will tend to be that, and the future will not have anything better for you. But a balance of not only looking at your mistakes, but also taking a sense of genuine pride about what happened in the past, I think that is a very balanced and a more sensible way of looking at our own histories and learning from them. So thank you once again, and it's great to be here with all of you.